Hey crew, it's Pitt, and I'm back with some more Socrates. Today we're going to be diving back into the works of Plato. This is continuation of Timaeus. We have talked up in the last one about the creation of the universe and the division of the forces and the fundamental creation of the universe itself and the setting of the planets in motion for the use of time, and also the beginning creation of the gods in what could be a couple of different ways. Today we're going to be talking more about the nature of the human soul and the beginnings of the mechanics of creation. And so I will be stopping and talking about things as we get to them, so it is not just dry reading, but there is a good bit of reading in it, and so I appreciate y'all hanging along. Let's go ahead and dive into the text and see what's going on. Let that be enough about the ancillary contributory causes by which the eyes have been assigned the power they now possess. However, along with this, we must also state the greatest of the beneficial effects, the reason the God gave them to us. According to my account, sight is responsible for the greatest benefit to us, because not one of the accounts we are relating about the universe would ever have been spoken without seeing the stars, or the sun, or the heavens. But now that day and night have been seen, months, and the annual cycle too, the equinoxes and solstices, number has been devised, and the concept of time and the investigation of the nature of the universe has been given to us. From this we have acquired philosophy in general, and no greater good has ever or will ever come to mortal creatures as a gift from the gods than this. So I declared this to be the greatest benefit of eyes. As for the others of lesser rate, why should we praise benefits for which someone who is no philosopher might lament if he lost sight of them? But he would weep in vain. Rather, let us declare for the following reasons that sight is the cause of this benefit. Sight was invented and bestowed upon us by the gods, so that we, beholding the revolution of news in the heavens, spirit in the heavens, could apply them to the orbits of thinking within ourselves. For these, though troubled, are kindred to those untroubled revolutions. And indeed, by learning these thoroughly and properly in accord with their nature, we could stabilize the wandering motions within ourselves by imitating the entirely stable orbits of the God. And in the case of sound and of hearing, the account is the same. They were bestowed by the gods for the same reason and with the same intentions as they gave sight. Indeed, speech too was instituted for these very purposes, and it contributes the greatest portion thereto. And so too does any music which works through sound and hearing, and is given for the sake of harmony. Harmony, whose movements are kindred to the orbits in our own soul, has been given by the muses to those who resort to them intelligently, not for the irrational pleasure thought to be so useful nowadays, but as an ally against the inharmonious orbit of the soul which has arisen in us, to bring it to order and concord with itself. Rhythm was given to us for the same reasons by the same gods as an aid, because of the unmeasured condition, the lack of grace which, for the most part, prevails upon us, or in us. Okay, there's a good bit in there, right? We're not going to talk about the solstices and equinoxes, although those do affect you. They do. Every nurse can tell you that when the full moon hits, things are going to get wild. Every policeman can tell you the same thing. There are cycles that do affect us in the grand scope of things, and that is because as above, so below. That does not mean that the minutia of your life is derived from those things, but they do affect your life. The casting of the vision and being able to ordain what is good and not is the stable route by which manifestation can begin, right? First you begin in yourself and you align yourselves according to the 8 laws of creation, and then you can start working on manifestation, and using your eyesight is one of those things, and your eye light. But when it says here that speech is the most important, that is truth. What you speak is literally what becomes your existence. When you manifest, you need to speak it out loud. You need to say, I am doing this thing. I am manifesting responsibility in my life. I am manifesting abundance in my life. I am manifesting whatever it is that you happen to want to manifest. And I am whatever you want to be the attribute of. Right? You have to speak these things out loud as though they already exist. All of those things are important parts to the manifestation process. And the music that you consume has a great effect upon you. If you are consuming music that is depressing, you will be depressed. And if you are consuming music that is about consuming things, then you will be very much tempted to consuming those things. And so, maybe surround yourself with positive music. Surround yourself with harmonious music. Surround yourself with rhythmic music that can help to stabilize your soul. I have a whole video about harmonics and how those help you, and specific tones can help in specific areas. You should check it out. Now, everything we have said so far, with few exceptions, has expounded the productions of spirit. However, we must also set alongside it an account of what comes into being through necessity. For the generation of this cosmos originated indeed in a mixture produced from the combination of necessity and spirit. Spirit rules over necessity by persuading her to lead most of what comes into being towards the very best. This again is a key component in manifestation. The energy that you expend is the energy that will be returned in proportional response according to the laws. And the necessity is what you are focusing that on. You are calling into being the thing that you are manifesting, and that is exactly the same as necessity here. You are using your spirit to rule over the necessity of whatever you're trying to manifest. And so this universe was constructed in this way and on these principles in the beginning, through the subjugation of necessity by intelligent persuasion. You have to physically invest the energy in the goal. Therefore, if anyone is to state truly how the universe came into being based on these principles, he must include also the form of the wandering cause and how it naturally evolved. So, we should retrace our steps once more, and adopting a different and appropriate fresh starting point from these themselves, we must now begin again from the beginning based on the factors, just as we did before. We should look to the nature itself of fire and water, and also air and earth, before the generation of the heaven and the condition they were in prior to that. For this day, no one has yet disclosed their origin, but we speak as if we know precisely fire and each of the others is. What precisely fire and each of the others is. Proposing that they are the principles and letters of the universe, when to a man of even a little intelligence, it is probably not appropriate even to liken them to syllables. So, let our statement on the matter be as follows. We should not speak now of the beginning of all things or their beginnings, or the way we think about them, for no other reason than the difficulty of presenting our opinions based upon the present manner of exposition. Nor should you believe that I need to address this topic, nor would I, for my part, be able to persuade myself that I would be right in attempting to burden myself with such a task. So, paying special heed to the initial statement about the capacity of the likely accounts, I shall endeavor to give an account no less likely than before, indeed, more so, from the beginning about each and everything. So, this, in truth, is the conclusion of that story, right? The last 3 or 4 episodes have been this story of creation and the nature of creation and the nature of spirit. And we're really starting a brand new one with all the assumptions of the old one. And he's saying something here about, like, at the time, their best knowledge was that fire, water, air, and earth comprised everything. And that is a logical assumption to make because even within ourselves, we have fire, which is the spirit, right? But we have air, which is the air we breathe. And we're comprised of 70% water, but the other percent is minerals. And so that is earth and water and air and fire all mixed into one right here. And then you look and you see the physical incarnation of the sun. And it's light and it's fire and it's a thing that you could probably touch in your mind if you're primitive and you don't know that it's too hot, right? And so that's a little bit of earth, just a little bit, and a lot of air because it's in the air and it's on fire, so it's got fire. And so you can rationalize how they see all of these things. But he also says that there's no way that this is all there is to it. And he's right. We now have molecular science. We now have atomic science. We now study physics. We now know way more things than we ever did before. But it is a fallacy to believe that we know everything, ever. And that includes me, right? I'm always trying to include the possibility that I am wrong in any statement that I make, right? I try to be as well educated as I possibly can before I make such a statement. But I try not to make statements unless I am informed on them at least a little bit. And so that's what he's saying here is I am informed a little bit, but I don't feel like I'm informed enough to dive into what is fire. Right? I can a little bit describe to you the things that we know the nature of fire. And that's where he's beginning to start now. And clearly we should now begin again. Once we have called upon the God, our Savior, at the very onset of our deliberations to see us safely out of an unusual and unaccustomed exposition to the doctrine of things probable. In any case, our fresh start concerning the universe should be more elaborate than before, for we distinguished 2 entities then, but now we must present a third factor, 3 into 1, right? 2 were sufficient for our previous descriptions, that one designated as a sort of model, discernible by spirit and ever the same, while the second was a copy of the model and involved in becoming and visible. But we did not distinguish a third entity at the time, as we thought it enough to have these 2. But now the argument seems to compel us to try to manifest a difficult and obscure form in words. What should we understand its capacity and nature to be? This in particular, it is the receptacle of all coming into being, like its nurse. Now, although the truth has been spoken, a clearer statement about it is still required, but it is difficult to do so, particularly because it is necessary for the sake of this to raise a preliminary problem about fire and its accompaniments. It is difficult in the case of each of these to state what sort should actually be called water rather than fire, and what sort should be referred to as anything in particular rather than as everything individually, and in such a manner as to employ language which is trustworthy and certain. How then may we speak about them in a likely manner, and in what way, and what can we say about them when faced with the problem? Okay. Now, this third element that we are introducing, the becoming, we've seen examples of the 3 into 1 already in this, but that is literally this again. We have what is, what can be, and then what is becoming now, right? So we talked about how I can make the choice to talk to you or to not talk to you, and how that provides divergent paths, right? This is the actual time as the choice is presented to you. It is it is the point at which manifestation has already happened, even if you haven't caught up to it yet. Remember, we talked about that yesterday, but that is, you have already visualized it, you have already spoken into being, so therefore it exists in your path already. And you just haven't walked up to it yet. And that is this point right here. That is what he is talking about at this point right here. And I'm not going to get into the second part of that because that is what he is getting into here. And first, we see what we now call water being condensed and becoming stones and earth, or so we think. And when melted or dispersed, the same substance in turn becomes wind and air. And air, when burned, becomes fire. And when this is combined once more and the fire is extinguished, it returns again to the form of air. And air comes together again, becomes dense, and forms clouds and mist. And by compacting even these even more, we get flowing water. And from water we go on to get earth and stones. And their coming into being appears to be a cycle where they interchange with one another in this way. We know that now, right? Beyond the doubt, we know that there is at least the water cycle. There is erosion. There is the isosceles and whatever the other one is when it goes down, like the rising and the lowering of the crust. And the cycle of everything is existent. And so they didn't understand how it worked, but they could recognize that it was. And that's what he says here. And accordingly, since none of these ever appear the same, which of them can a person firmly state to be this something or the other? At what point is the water and the vapor separated? What point is it no longer water and now vapor? What exactly is that defining point? Because at some point, it was just water and it has now become air. And so there has to be that dividing line in there somewhere. But to narrow that dividing line down is ridiculously difficult to do. You're talking about nanometers or nanocentimeters, like the tiniest fraction of space that you could possibly imagine. So tiny as to be indiscernible. Is it not possible, and by far the most cautious approach when making assertions about these is to speak as follows. Whatever we observe continually becoming in different ways at different times, fire for instance, we should consistently refer to fire not as this, but as like this. And we should never refer to water as this, but always as such as this. Never ever refer to anything else as something possessing fixity by using the terms this and that, and presume that we are pointing to anything. That's why I try to couch my language, right? Like, this is all new to me. I didn't study the works of Plato, but these are all things that I worked out for myself, and I very, very much try not to put too fine of a point on things. And if I am putting a fine point on anything, I try to make it very clear that it is my opinion, that it is my findings, or my studies have led to, or something along those natures, so that you know that I am not trying to say that this is the truth. It is what I feel has been shown to me through my studies, always. And so we shouldn't refer to water as water, because we don't know if it is water or if it is transferring to air. Now, we have a little bit more of a firm grasp on those things now than they did then, but it is like hydrogen and oxygen are still there when it's vapor. They're just not combined, right? And now that we know that hydrogen and oxygen are things and that that is what differentiates the chemical bonding of these elements together is what differentiates between water and vapor. And so we have water contained in the vapor in the form of steam, but that breaks apart too, or it condenses and falls, whatever happens to happen. But the actual differentiation is the molecular separation. But they didn't know that. We know that, and we don't fully understand how it entirely works. Right? We know the mechanics of it to a great degree. We can say that if you add heat to this, it will separate the water. It will cause the chemical reaction of the water to separate. But why does it do that is a whole different thing. And we understand a good bit of that mechanics, but not entirely all of it either. For they take flight and do not wait for the this and the that and the thereby, and whatever expressions indicate that they are constant. So, we should not use these terms about them, but in relation to each of them and all of them together, we should describe them as such as this, ever recurring like. So we should call fire that which is such as this throughout the entire process, and so for all things that involve coming into being. But we should refer only to that in which each of these makes its appearance, and into which each dissolves again thereafter, by using the terms this and that. However, anything with some sort of quality, be it hot or white, or any of the opposites, or anything derived from these, should be referred to by none of these terms. And again, like the laws of thermodynamics, you cannot add cold to anything, right? You can only remove heat. Heat is the thing, and you can add heat or you can remove heat, but you cannot add cold or remove cold. That's the basic same terms right here is what he's saying. And so you can't really define white because white is just the absence of black. And so to say that this is white is very exclusionary, but the same is true for hot, right? The division between hot and cold is a relative term. The division between light and dark is a relative term. And so he's telling us here, try not to use relative terms. That is pretty good summary of this entire paragraph. But I must make an effort to explain this anew and even more clearly. If someone having molded all manner of shapes out of gold, kept on remolding each shape into all the others without stopping, and someone were to point to one of them and ask what it is, in truth, the safest answer is gold. But the triangle and all the other shapes arising in it, we should never refer to as these, as if they were things that are, for they change, even as we make the assertion. Rather, we should be content if they deign to accept the cautious designation such as this. And we must certainly give the same account also of the nature of the recipient of all these bodies. We must assert that it is always the same, for it never departs at all from its own power. For it is always receiving everything, but it never adopts the shape like the things which enter into it, in any way at all. Therein lies the natural recipient of all impressions, moved and shaped by the things that enter it, seeming to change from time to time because of these. What enters it and leaves it are imitations of the things that are always modeled upon them in some manner which is hard to describe and extraordinary, which we shall deal with on another occasion. Right, so this again is try not to put specifics on things that are better left as generals. Some things can be specifics. This is a lighter, right? It is comprised of a lot of things, but its function is a lighter. So we can call it a lighter, but I wouldn't call it fire. It is comprised of gas. You can definitely create fire with it, so fire is contained within it, but it is not fire. And so you wouldn't designate the fire starting device as fire. You would designate it as the fire starting device. That is what is being said right here. Don't refer to the things that are made from the elements as the elements themselves. When we talk about water, you can call it hydrogen or dihydrogen oxide. You would fool a lot of college kids into thinking you should ban it, but you can refer to it that way. But it is water because it is the combination of those elements. But we could refer to it as the elements. But there are other elements in there, so referring to it as the elements, hydrogen and water, is insufficient. There are more elements in there. There's magnesium and zinc and calcium and all of the other things that are present everywhere, and the nutrients that we take into our body to help form who we are. And so it is insufficient to refer to them as simply being this element. They are not just that element. There's other things in the element. And so water becomes something more than the sum of its parts, and a useful designator for water. But at some point, the water becomes ice, and at some part, it becomes vapor. And so limit your specifics to what you can be specific about. That was a long way of saying that, right? Leaving that aside, we must now conceive of three categories: that which comes into being, that in which it comes into being, and the original, and the likeness of which that which comes into being grows. What's more, it is appropriate to liken the recipient to mother, the original to father, and the nature arising between these two to offspring. And we must also understand that if the recipient of impressions is to display all the varieties of embellishment, this entity, in which the impressions will be said, would need to be well prepared. And this will not occur unless it is devoid of all those characteristics which it is about to receive from elsewhere. For it is similar to anything that entered in. Then, whenever something of an opposite or completely different nature entered and was received, the receptacle would present a bad likeness as its own feature would intrude. Therefore, that which receives all forms into itself must be devoid of all forms, just as skilled perfumers contrive firstly to do just this, making the oil which will receive the scents as odorless as possible. And whoever turns his hand to molding shapes in some soft material allows no shape at all to be present beforehand. But they even it out first and render it as smooth as possible. In the same way, it is fitting that whatever will continually, throughout its entire self, receive the likeness of all that is known by nous, spirit, and is always, should also be naturally devoid of all forms. So then, the mother and receptacle of what is generated, visible, and in every respect perceptible, should not be called earth, air, fire, or water, or anything that they produce, or that from which they arise. Yet we shall not deceive ourselves if we say it is an invisible and shapeless form, all receiving, participating in the most baffling way in that which can be known by spirit and hard to understand. Insofar as it is possible to arrive at its nature from our previous deliberations, it would be most correct to describe it as follows. The part that has become fiery appears at the same time as fire. The moistened part is water, and the earth and air also, and to the extent that it receives imitations of these. And yet, we must investigate this further through argument by making distinctions about these. Is there such a thing as fire, just by itself? And everything that we constantly refer to in this way, each as things in themselves? Or is it only what we look at and anything else we perceive through the body that possesses this sort of truth? Is there nothing else besides these in which any sense whatsoever? And do we speak idly every time we declare there is a form for each, discernible by spirit? In this, in the end, nothing but a word. is this, in the end, nothing but a word? Now, it would be unworthy either to dismiss the present issue by asserting that this is how matters stand without any deliberation or judgment, nor should we insert another lengthy secondary topic into an already lengthy discourse. Yet, if it proved possible to make a significant distinction, but quite briefly, that would be most appropriate to our purpose. So, I cast my own vote as follows. If spirit and true opinion indeed represent two categories, then definitively there are these forms, just by themselves, incapable of being perceived by our senses, known by spirit alone. However, if, as it appears to be some, true opinion does not differ at all from spirit, then by contrast, everything that we perceive by means of the body must be designated as completely definite. Well, we must declare that these are two, because they are arisen independently and have dissimilar characteristics. One of them is engendered through instruction, and the other through persuasion. One always arises along with a true account, while the other is devoid of an account. And one is unmoved by persuasion, while the other is amenable to persuasion. Indeed, all men may be said to partake of opinion, but only the gods and some small class of humanity partake of spirit. Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add to that, right? But, and since this is how matters stand, we must agree that the form which is always the same is one, ungenerated, undecaying, neither receiving anything into itself from anywhere else, nor entering into anything else anywhere, invisible and imperceptible. Spirit has been assigned the task of investigating this. The second bears the same name as that and is similar thereto, perceptible, generated, constantly being moved, coming into being in some location, and then perishing out of that place once more. It is apprehended by opinion, accompanied by sense perception. The third category is space, which is always not accepting destruction, providing a basis for everything that comes into being, itself apprehended without involving the senses, by some spurious reasoning difficult to believe in. This indeed we look towards when we engage in dreams, declaring that whatever is must presumably be in some location and occupy some space, and whatever is not somehow either in heaven or earth, either in earth or in heaven is nothing. On account of this dreaming, we become unable, on awakening, to make these distinctions, and others akin to them, even in relation to the unsleeping and truly subsisting nature, to the state of the truth, that in the case of an image, it does not itself even possess the very thing it has been fashioned after, but always bears an appearance belonging to something else. It is appropriate for these reasons that it come into being, something different, clinging on to being in some way or other, lest it be absolutely nothing. However, in support of what actually is, the precise and true account states that as long as one thing is different from another, neither can ever come into being in the other, so that they simultaneously become one and the same, and two. That's a fundamental law, right? You cannot manifest within yourself. You can alter things through manifestation about yourself, but you can't generate money and have it manifest inside your body. You can't make something appear inside of something else. It has to appear in the void between the molecules of air, right? Supposing for a moment that manifestation was real and you could close your eyes and say, I want a car. Well, you wouldn't want that car to appear in the middle of a wall, and it can't. It would displace the wall. It would destroy the wall. It would not be inside the wall. It would replace the parts of the wall. And so that is what is being laid out right here. Is you can't manifest inside of something else. There cannot be creation outside of something else. So you can take different elements and you can put them together and create a new thing. But you can't create the element of fire. You can't create hydrogen. You can separate it from where it's bound. You can refine it. You can compress it, but you don't create it. That's what's being said here. So, let this concisely argued account be the one that receives my vote. There is being, space, and becoming. These three, even before the heaven came into being. And yet, the nurse of becoming, rendered watery and fiery, and receiving the forms of earth and air, and adopting whatever other characteristics are a consequence of these, presents a variegated appearance. And because of being filled with powers that were neither similar nor equally balanced, no part of her was equally balanced. Rather, being swayed irregularly in all directions, she was shaken by those powers, and as she moved, she in turn shook them once more. And as they move, borne continually in one direction or another, they are separated just like materials, shaken and sifted by sieves, and instruments for purifying grain. The dense and heavy components go one way, while the light and loose and light components are carried to a different place and settle there. That's got a lot to do with the Timaeus model we talked about yesterday. And the four kinds were then shaken in this way by the receptacle, which was itself in motion, like an instrument for shaking, which therefore separated the most dissimilar farthest apart from one another, while the most similar were forced together into the same place. And so it was that these different types each occupied a distinct space, even before the universe composed of them had come into being. Indeed, prior to this, they all behaved in an irrational and unmeasured manner. However, when the universe was brought to order, fire, water, earth, and air did possess some traces of themselves, and yet they were entirely in the sort of state that anything would be in when God is absent from it. Another way of talking about this is the very first episodes of PittCast, when we were talking about Tiamat and the creation of the universe. Such being their nature at the time, God first gave them a structure by means and forms and numbers. Let this above all be our constant assertion. God constructed them to be as beautiful and as excellent as possible. But this was not their previous condition. But now I must attempt to show you the structure of each of them, and their origin by means of an unfamiliar account. And yet, since you have been involved in the courses of education that I must draw upon to demonstrate my assertion, you will follow me. Now, in the first place, we're going to stop before he actually gets in, like we're going to read this next paragraph. And then when we come back, we will read this paragraph again. But now in the first place, fire and earth, water and air are bodies, as is obvious to everyone, I presume, and the form of every body also possesses depth. And it is absolutely necessary that depth, in turn, be contained by a flat surface, and that in any straight-sided, flat surface is constructed from triangles. All triangles originate from two triangles, each of which possess a single right angle, and while the others are acute. One of them has half a right angle on either side, divided by equal sides, while the other case, the portions of the right angle are unequal, apportioned by unequal sides. So, proceeding on the basis of this likely account accompanied by necessity, we propose this as the cause of fire and the other bodies, but any causes still higher than these, God knows, and so do any men who are dear to him. So we need to state what the most beautiful bodies would be, four in number, dissimilar to one another, and yet capable of arising from one another. In some cases, when they are broken apart, for once we accomplish this, we are in possession of the truth concerning the generation of earth and fire and whatever lies between them, in a proportion. Indeed, we shall not concede to anyone that there are visible bodies more beautiful than these anywhere, each based on a single type. All right, now, the next part of this is going to be going into some geometry, and I want to separate that as much as possible from what we did here. This is getting kind of long, and if I start doing math now, you are definitely not going to hang around. And so the next one will be kind of math heavy, but not even diving into the heavy math. We will be nibbling on the fringes in the next part and trying to just conceptualize what they're talking about. Look at what they're talking about here. What he is describing is the nature of the atom without being able to do so. Like, he has no knowledge of the atom, but the interplay between earth, air, fire, and water is literally protons, neutrons, electrons, and the space in between them. And the rotations of all of those can be triangulated by the use of triangles. Such is the nature of creation. And if you can have, through willful manipulation of energies, which I believe is a possibility, if you can have that, and you can visualize, which I cannot visualize, but if you can conceptualize and hold in your mind the proper allocations of things, then it may be possible for things to happen. That is deep into the land of Spectrean conspiracy, and by no means should be taken lightly before you would attempt anything even remotely even remotely close to that. I would make sure that I was aligned with the 8 laws of creation. I would make sure that my intentions were very much aligned with where they needed to be. Because if they were not, catastrophic effects can be taken from that. That is the borderline of a knowledge, right? We talk on this channel a lot about knowledge and responsibilities. And if you pursue that particular knowledge, there is a level of responsibility. There is a reason why he couches his language. There is a reason why the Pythagorean, not the theorem, but the Pythagoreans, the people who studied the things that Pythagoras actually taught, the things behind the things that are known and talked about, then you can understand why they had the societies that they did, why they have those funny little handshakes where they grab you in funny spots, and why it is important to know that the person that you are relaying the information to is a reliable one. There is a very good reason why the kind of knowledge that I dish out on this channel is not readily available. I am putting the responsibility on you, and I try to, whenever we reach one of those levels, whenever we talk about one of those things, to make sure that you understand that. Because that is what a master and apprentice would do. Not calling myself a master, but that is the relationship there, right? If I am teaching you something, then I am the master. But if you are teaching me, then you are the master. It is never to place me above you or you above me. We are equals in this journey 100%. And so there is give and take, there's learning from, there's master and student in every relationship. But that is the point of the master-student relationship, is to make sure that the student is actually ready for the knowledge. I am going to assume, as I have in many different places, that if you have slogged through this study and you are at this particular point, then you are ready for the knowledge, and you have been led here for that point. That is true at every single point where knowledge is given. And there is a lot of knowledge given out here. Some more will be tomorrow as we get into the triangles. That is a level of knowledge. And while I cannot close my eye and visualize anything, like I am working on fixing that, I am trying to manifest that, but it's not happening, and that's up to him. But I can conceptualize, so my manifestation works a little bit differently than everybody else's. Like y'all fix an image and y'all can see an image of things, and I don't have that. I have to know the composition of it. So when I manifest, I can't manifest a picture of a box. I have to know in my mind the dimensions of that box are this, and it is comprised of this, and there is tape in this location. And I don't see any of that, but I know where it's at. I can visualize or conceptualize a box without ever visualizing it. And so when I conceptualize, it's the same as y'all visualize it. But y'all get it easier because you can have the focus. I have to do it through a different means that's really kind of hard to explain. It really is. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a very complicated topic, hopefully. I brought a little bit of knowledge and not too much destruction. It is one of the risks that I take. And I know that some people are going to say, well, look at this, and this guy's completely nuts. And I'm okay with being called nuts. I believe in some pretty unconventional things. I am okay with not fitting in and all of those things. So I'm not okay with ever harming somebody. And so I do not intentionally mean to harm anyone. And I want you to be very, very clear. You have to be aligned correctly before you attempt anything with these triangles. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You're perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pitt's Take. Peace.